I am Salah ad-Din, a name that history has echoed through the centuries. Born in 1137 in Tikrit, Mesopotamia, I was a son of the Kurdish Ayyubid family. My life was shaped by a series of critical moments, by the weight of my heritage, and by the larger-than-life forces of destiny that seemed to guide my every step. My story is not one of individual conquest alone, but of faith, leadership, and the duty I felt to defend Islam, even at great personal cost. Tikrit, a small city on the banks of the Tigris River, is where I was born to Najm ad-Din Ayyub and his wife, the daughter of a local noble. My family was Kurdish, from a tribal background, with no grand royal heritage, but one shaped by a deep sense of honor and service to the military. My father's position as a soldier under the Seljuk Empire meant we lived a life of constant movement. It was here that I first learned of the importance of loyalty, honor, and martial prowess. From an early age, I exhibited a keen sense for military strategy, an interest in history, and a devotion to Islamic principles. When I was still very young, my family moved to the Seljuk-controlled city of Damascus, where I spent much of my childhood. I received a formal education in both the religious and the military spheres. It was there that I first encountered Imad ad-Din Zengi, the great military leader who, though he did not know it at the time, would shape my future. Zengi's struggle against the Crusaders and his vision of uniting the fragmented Muslim world under one banner resonated deeply with me. The idea of reconquering the lost lands of the Levant, including Jerusalem, ignited a fire in my heart that would burn throughout my life. My military education was supplemented by my deepening religious faith, with a particular focus on the Sunni interpretation of Islam, as it was the dominant sect in the lands I would one day rule. At the age of 14, I was taken under the wing of my uncle, Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, a military commander in the service of Zengi. My first taste of battle came during my service with Shirkuh, who was involved in several campaigns against the Crusaders and the Fatimids. My uncle saw potential in me and trained me in the ways of military leadership. I learned how to read the battlefield, how to command troops, and how to rally the masses with speeches of faith and unity. This was the crucible that forged me into the man who would one day lead the Muslim forces against the Crusaders. In 1169, after a series of military campaigns, Shirkuh was appointed as the Vizier of Egypt, an important position in the Fatimid Caliphate. This was the moment that my fate began to take a more defined shape. At just 32 years of age, I followed my uncle to Egypt, where we were tasked with stabilizing the region and expelling the Crusader influence. Egypt, at the time, was ruled by the weakened Fatimid dynasty, a Shia Muslim caliphate. The Fatimids had once been strong, but by the time I arrived, their power had waned, and their control was largely symbolic. The Crusaders had been a thorn in their side, but more dangerous still were the internal divisions. It was here that I truly began to establish my name. My uncle died unexpectedly in 1169, and I was appointed to replace him as vizier by the dying Fatimid Caliph Al-Adid. However, I had no intention of serving a weak caliphate for long. Instead, I set about consolidating power, carefully aligning myself with the Sunni majority and eradicating the remnants of the Shia Fatimid regime. The people of Egypt, weary of the chaos, welcomed my leadership, and I set to work rebuilding the army and fortifying Egypt against the Crusaders. This was the moment when the seeds of the Ayyubid dynasty were planted. I took control of Egypt, and with the support of my military, I began to unite other regions under my rule. I took Syria, and soon the Levant, setting the stage for the confrontation that would define my life. The Crusaders and the city of Jerusalem. The Crusaders had established the Kingdom of Jerusalem in 1099, and the city had remained in their hands for nearly 90 years. The Christian kingdom was a constant threat to the Muslim heartlands, and it was my destiny to reclaim Jerusalem. I understood that the land was sacred to Muslims, Jews, and Christians, and its control was a matter not just of territory, but of honor and faith. The road to Jerusalem was long and fraught with difficulty. I first turned my attention to the Crusader states, systematically dismantling their fortresses and cities. My military campaigns were calculated and strategic, designed not for glory, but for the long-term goal of unity. The Crusaders, fragmented and divided, were ill-prepared to face a unified Muslim force. In 1187, after years of skirmishes and negotiations, I set my sights on Tiberias, where a large Crusader army had gathered. The Battle of Hattin, fought in July 1187, was one of the defining moments of my career. I outmaneuvered the Crusaders, trapping them in the desert and forcing them to surrender. King Guy of Lusignan, the leader of the Crusader forces, was captured, and the remnants of his army scattered. The victory was overwhelming, and with it came the opening of the road to Jerusalem. In the summer of 1187, I marched to Jerusalem. My army was well prepared, but I knew that the city was more than just a fortress. It was a symbol. The Crusaders who held it had used it as a base of operations for decades. To reclaim it was to strike a blow at the heart of their presence in the Holy Land. The siege of Jerusalem was not a simple matter of military tactics. The city was heavily fortified, and the defenders, led by the Hospitallers and Templars, were determined to resist. For weeks, my forces surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and bombarding the walls. But I was patient. I offered the defenders a chance to surrender peacefully, but they refused. On October 2nd, 1187, after a final assault, the city fell. It was a moment of profound significance. The city that had been held by the Crusaders for nearly a century was once again in Muslim hands. But I did not celebrate in the way that others might have expected. I entered the city with humility, walking through its gates not as a conqueror but as a liberator. I ensured the safety of the Christian inhabitants, allowing them to leave the city peacefully, in contrast to the massacres that the Crusaders had committed when they took the city in 1099. I set up a ransom system for the Christians who had remained, offering them a chance to purchase their freedom. Jerusalem was now in Muslim hands again, and the Crusaders were forced to retreat. This victory was the pinnacle of my career, a moment of triumph not only for me but for all of Islam. The fall of Jerusalem did not go unnoticed in Europe. The Crusaders were enraged, and soon the Third Crusade was launched, led by Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. I prepared for battle, knowing that the Crusaders would not rest until they had taken Jerusalem back. The subsequent battles were fierce, particularly at Arsuf, where Richard the Lionheart and I faced off in 1191. The Crusaders managed to capture some coastal cities, but Jerusalem remained beyond their grasp. The years dragged on, and while the Crusaders advanced, I held firm in my defense of the city. In the end, a truce was reached in 1192, which allowed Christian pilgrims to visit Jerusalem, but the city remained in Muslim hands. In the years that followed, I continued to rule with the same devotion to justice and Islam that had guided my life. But as my health began to decline, I knew that my time was coming to an end. I spent my final days reflecting on the struggles and triumphs of my life, not seeking glory for myself, but hoping that my actions would inspire future generations. On March 4th, 1193, I passed away in Damascus. My death was mourned throughout the Muslim world, but my legacy endures. I had united the Muslim world, reclaimed Jerusalem, and defended Islam against the Crusaders. My name lives on not as a conqueror, but as a symbol of justice, mercy, and piety. I am Salah ad-Din. My life was not one of simple victories, but one of purpose. A purpose driven by my faith in Allah and my desire to protect and unite the Muslim world.